So there I was, sitting in this dingy office that smelled like stale cigarettes and broken dreams, staring at a guy who looked like he'd rather be literally anywhere else on the planet. His nameplate said Mr. Hartwell, but he told me to call him Rick, which should have been my first red flag, honestly. Any questions about the position? Rick asked, not looking up from whatever he was scribbling on his clipboard. I mean, yeah, I had questions. Like, why was the job posting so vague? Why did they want to interview me at 11 p.m.? And why did this place look like a front for something sketchy? But I was 3 months behind on rent, and my roommate Jake had started leaving passive-aggressive notes about financial responsibility taped to the fridge, so I kept my mouth shut. Nah, I'm good, I lied. Rick finally looked up at me. Dude had these tired eyes, like he'd seen some stuff he couldn't unsee. Look, kid, what's your name again? Tyler. Tyler Morrison. Right, Tyler? I'm gonna be straight with you, because I like you. He didn't look like he liked anybody, but whatever. This job isn't for everyone. Matter of fact, most people quit after the first night. What exactly am I supposed to be doing again? I asked, because the job posting had just said security specialist, with a salary that was way too good for someone with my qualifications. Which, let's be honest, weren't much. Rick leaned back in his creaky chair. You ever heard of Meridian Psychiatric Hospital? I shook my head. Should I have? Closed down about 15 years ago. Real messy situation. Anyway, the building's been sitting empty ever since, and we need someone to keep an eye on it. Make sure nobody breaks in, does anything stupid, you know? So I'm like a night watchman, something like that. Rick pulled out a heavy-duty flashlight and a set of keys, sliding them across the desk. Shift runs from midnight to 6 a.m. You walk the perimeter, check the doors, make sure everything's secure. Easy money. I picked up the flashlight. Thing was solid as a baseball bat. Why is the pay so high for just walking around an empty building? Rick's expression went weird for a second, like he was remembering something unpleasant. Let's just say the last few guys we hired weren't reliable. We need someone who can stick with it. What happened to them? They quit. He said it real quick, like he practiced that answer. Look, Tyler, you seem like a smart kid. You follow the rules, you'll be fine. Rules. Rick opened a desk drawer and pulled out a single sheet of paper. At the top, it said Meridian Security Protocols in big, bold letters. Underneath was exactly one line of text. Don't die. I stared at it for a solid 10 seconds, waiting for him to laugh or tell me it was a joke. He didn't. That's it. I asked. That's the only rule. Only one you need to worry about. Rick stood up and grabbed his jacket from the back of his chair. I'll drive you over there, show you around. After tonight, you'll be on your own. The drive to Meridian took about 20 minutes through some parts of town I'd never seen before. We didn't talk much, which was fine by me, because Rick had this energy like a guy who'd rather be planning his own funeral than making small talk. When we pulled up to the hospital, I gotta admit, the place gave me the creeps immediately. It was this massive brick building, maybe 6 stories tall, with these tall, narrow windows that looked like dead eyes staring out into the night. Most of them were boarded up, but a few still had glass, and they reflected the streetlights in this really unsettling way. Home sweet home, Rick muttered, killing the engine. We got out and walked toward the main entrance. The parking lot was cracked and overgrown with weeds, and there was this weird smell in the air. Not like garbage or anything obvious, just off. Like something had been sitting too long in the sun. Place has been empty this whole time? I asked. Pretty much. City keeps meaning to tear it down, but there's always some bureaucratic nonsense getting in the way. Rick unlocked a side door that had about 6 different deadbolts. Budget constraints, environmental concerns, historical preservation. You know how it is. We stepped inside and Rick flicked on his flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing a long hallway lined with doors. The walls were that institutional green color that probably looked depressing even when the place was operational. So what exactly am I looking for? I asked, following Rick deeper into the building. Anything that shouldn't be here. Squatters, vandals, copper thieves, kids looking for a place to party or film TikToks or whatever. He stopped at a junction where a hallway split in 3 directions. Building's got 6 floors. Basement, ground level, and 4 floors up. You don't need to check every room every night, but make sure you hit the main areas. We spent the next hour walking through the place. Rick showed me the stairwells, the common areas, the old administrative offices. Most of the furniture was gone, but there were still remnants of what the place used to be. motivational posters with torn corners, a few scattered medical charts, an old wheelchair with a busted wheel sitting in a corner like it was waiting for someone who was never coming back. One more thing, Rick said as we finished the tour back in the main lobby. Whatever you do, don't go down to the basement alone. Why not? Structural damage. Some of the floors are rotted out, and there's probably asbestos down there. If you hear anything that sounds like it's coming from below, just make a note of it in your report. Don't investigate. That made sense, I guess. But something about the way he said it felt off, like there was more to the story. Any other tips? I asked. Rick checked his watch. It's 11:45. I need to head out. He handed me a business card with just a phone number on it. If there's a real emergency, call that number. Not 911, not the regular company line. That number. What counts as a real emergency? You'll know. He headed for the door, then stopped and looked back at me. Tyler. Yeah, that rule I showed you earlier? I wasn't kidding around. And then he left, and I was alone in an abandoned psychiatric hospital at midnight with nothing but a flashlight and the world's most ominous job instruction. For the first couple hours, everything was pretty chill. I walked the halls, checked the doors, tried not to think about all the crazy stuff that probably happened in this place back when it was operational. Mental hospitals from the old days weren't exactly known for their humane treatment methods, you know? The building was actually kind of interesting once you got used to it. Each floor had a different layout depending on what kind of patients they housed. The ground floor was mostly administrative stuff and common areas. Second floor looked like it was for general population. Third floor had smaller rooms with heavier doors, probably for patients who needed more supervision. Fourth floor was where things got really weird. The rooms up there were tiny like prison cells. Some of them still had restraints attached to the walls. There was this one room that was completely padded, floor to ceiling, with these thick quilted mats that were stained with God knows what. I didn't spend much time up there. By 3 a.m., I was starting to feel pretty good about the job. Yeah, the place was creepy, but it was also peaceful in a weird way. No traffic noise, no neighbors playing loud music, no drama. Just me and my flashlight making sure nobody was stealing copper pipes or whatever. That's when I heard the piano. It was faint at first, like maybe I was imagining it. Just a few random notes echoing through the building. But as I stood there in the second floor hallway, listening, it got clearer. Someone was playing an actual song. Something slow and melancholy that I almost recognized but couldn't quite place. No, I'm not a complete idiot. I knew there wasn't supposed to be anyone else in the building. But maybe Rick had forgotten to mention that they had some kind of automated system or something. Old buildings sometimes had weird acoustic effects, right? Sound carrying from outside. Maybe. I followed the music. It seemed to be coming from somewhere on the ground floor, toward the back of the building. As I got closer, I could make out more details. It was definitely a piano, and whoever was playing knew what they were doing. The melody was sad but beautiful, like something you'd hear in a movie when someone was remembering better times. I found the source in what used to be the hospital's recreation room. There was still some furniture scattered around, a few tables, some chairs, and in the corner, an old upright piano. The kind with the wooden cabinet and the brass pedals that probably weighed a ton. And someone was playing it. I couldn't see who it was from the doorway. The room was dark except for my flashlight beam, and the piano was positioned so that the player's back was to me. All I could make out was a figure hunched over the keys, hands moving in slow, deliberate motions. Hey, I called out, trying to sound authoritative instead of terrified. Building's closed. You need to leave. The music stopped immediately. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the unexpected concert had been. The figure at the piano didn't turn around or acknowledge me in any way. It just sat there, completely still, like a statue. I'm serious, I said, taking a step into the room. I'm calling the police if you don't. That's when the figure turned around. I'm not sure how to describe what I saw without sounding completely insane. It looked like a person, sort of, same basic shape and size. But the proportions were all wrong. The arms were too long, hanging down past where the knees should be. The head was tilted at an angle that would have snapped a normal person's neck. And the face. God, the face. It was pale, almost white, with dark circles around the eyes that looked less like shadows and more like holes. The mouth was open in what might have been a smile, but it was too wide, stretching almost from ear to ear. And when it looked at me, I got the distinct impression that it was happy to see me. Very happy. I did what any rational person would do in that situation. I ran. I bolted out of the recreation room and down the hallway, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly as I tried not to trip over the debris scattered across the floor. Behind me, I could hear something that sounded like laughter, but distorted, like someone had recorded it and played it back at the wrong speed. I made it to the main lobby before I realized that running to the exit might not be the smartest move. Whatever that thing was, I didn't want to lead it outside where it could hurt other people. Plus, Rick had been pretty clear about the whole don't die rule, and running into the night seemed like a good way to violate that. So I did the next logical thing. I headed for the stairs. The stairwell was narrow and echo-wide, and every footstep sounded like a gunshot in the silence. I climbed to the second floor, then the third, trying to put as much distance as possible between me and whatever was in that recreation room. By the time I reached the fourth floor, I was breathing hard and starting to think more clearly. Maybe I'd imagined the whole thing. Maybe the stress of the new job and the creepy atmosphere had gotten to me. Maybe there hadn't been anyone at the piano at all, and I just psyched myself out. That's when I heard the music again. But this time, it wasn't coming from downstairs. It was coming from right down the hall. I turned off my flashlight and pressed myself against the wall, listening. The same slow, melancholy tune was drifting out of one of the rooms, maybe 30 feet away. And as I stood there in the darkness, trying to convince myself that this was all some kind of hallucination, I heard something else. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps moving from room to room, getting closer. Whatever was in this building with me, it was hunting. My new job has only one rule. Don't die. Part 2. Okay, so picture this. I'm standing in a pitch-black hallway in an abandoned mental hospital, listening to some nightmare creature play piano while it hunts me down. And my brilliant survival strategy? Hide in the creepiest part of the building. Yeah, I'm not exactly leadership material. The footsteps were getting closer, so I did what any sensible person would do. I ducked into the nearest room and prayed it didn't have squeaky hinges. Thankfully, the door opened silently, and I slipped inside what looked like it used to be a patient room. The space was tiny, maybe 8 by 10 feet, with a single barred window that let in just enough streetlight for me to make out the basic layout. There was a metal bed frame bolted to the floor and what looked like a small sink in the corner. The walls were that same institutional green, but someone had scratched words into the paint. I couldn't read most of it in the dim light, but I caught a few phrases, "They're listening," and "Don't trust the music." Well, that was reassuring. I pressed my ear to the door and listened. The piano music had stopped again, but those footsteps were still out there, moving slowly down the hallway. They had this weird rhythm to them, like the person walking had an uneven gait. Step, pause, drag, step, pause, drag. The sound stopped right outside my door. I held my breath and tried to become one with the wall. Through the tiny gap under the door, I could see a shadow blocking the light from the hallway. Whatever was out there was just standing there, and I got the creepiest feeling that it knew exactly where I was. Then I heard something that made my blood turn to ice water. The same melody from the piano, but now it was being hummed in this soft, almost childlike voice. And it was right outside my door. The shadow under the door shifted, then disappeared. The humming faded as the footsteps continued down the hall. I waited until I couldn't hear anything before I dared to breathe again. My phone showed 3:47 a.m. Still over 2 hours until my shift ended. I was starting to understand why Rick's previous employees had quit after one night. I gave it another 5 minutes before I cracked the door open and peeked out. The hallway was empty, but I could hear the piano music again, fainter now, like it was coming from a different floor. Maybe the thing had moved on, and I could make my way back downstairs and waited out in the lobby. Spoiler alert, that was not going to happen. I made it maybe 20 feet down the hallway before I realized I wasn't alone. There was someone standing at the far end of the corridor, silhouetted against the window. At first, I thought it was the same figure from the piano, but as my eyes adjusted, I could see that this one was different. This one was wearing what looked like a nurse's uniform. She was facing away from me, standing perfectly still with her hands clasped behind her back. Her hair was pulled up in some kind of old-fashioned style, and even from a distance, I could tell there was something off about her posture. She was too rigid, like a mannequin. I debated whether to try talking to her. Maybe she was just another trespasser, someone who'd gotten lost in the building. But something about the way she was standing there, not moving, not reacting to my presence, made me think that conversation wasn't going to be an option. I started backing away slowly, trying not to make any noise. That's when she turned around. Her face was wrong. That's the only way I can describe it. It looked like someone had taken a normal person's face and stretched it vertically, making everything too long and narrow. Her eyes were sunken deep into her skull, and her mouth was just a thin black line that seemed to go on forever. But the worst part was that she was smiling. Not with her mouth, but with her eyes. Like she'd been waiting for me to show up and was absolutely delighted that I'd finally arrived. She raised one hand and waved at me. A slow, deliberate wave, like she was greeting an old friend. Then she started walking toward me. I turned and ran back the way I'd come, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly as I tried not to trip over the debris in the hallway. Behind me, I could hear her footsteps, the same uneven rhythm I'd heard before. Step, pause, drag, step, pause, drag. I reached the stairwell and took the steps 3 at a time, heading up to the 5th floor. Maybe I could find a room with a lock, or at least somewhere to hide until morning. But when I reached the landing, I stopped dead in my tracks. There was music coming from upstairs too. Not piano this time. This sounded like singing. Multiple voices, like a choir, but the harmony was all wrong. The notes didn't fit together the way they should, creating this discordant sound that made my skin crawl. I looked back down the stairs. I could hear the nurse things still coming up, getting closer. But I definitely didn't want to go toward the singing either. So I did what I was getting really good at. I picked the least terrible option and went sideways. The 5th floor was different from the others. Instead of patient rooms, it was mostly storage and administrative areas. There were filing cabinets lining the walls, most of them tipped over and spilling their contents across the floor. Medical charts, patient records, and official-looking documents were scattered everywhere, like someone had trashed the place looking for something specific. I found an office about halfway down the hall and ducked inside. This one actually had a door I could close and lock, which felt like winning the lottery at that point. The room was small but cluttered with overturned furniture and more scattered papers. I barricaded the door with a heavy desk and tried to calm down. The singing from upstairs had stopped, and I couldn't hear the nurse thing anymore either. Maybe they'd lost track of me. Maybe I could actually make it through the rest of my shift without becoming a statistic. That's when I noticed the papers on the floor weren't random medical charts. They were all about the same patient. Patient number 247. Narration. I picked up one of the files and used my flashlight to read it. The first page was a standard intake form dated 15 years ago, just a few months before the hospital closed. Sarah had been admitted for severe dissociative episodes and auditory hallucinations. But as I read further, the reports got weirder. The doctors noted that Sarah claimed to hear music that no one else could hear. She said the music was coming from other patients, people who had died in the hospital years before. According to her, they were trying to communicate with her to tell her their stories. The staff initially dismissed this as typical psychotic behavior, but then other patients started reporting the same thing. Music in the walls, voices singing lullabies in empty rooms, piano melodies drifting through the ventilation system. The final report in the file was dated just a week before the hospital closed. It was written by Dr. Martinez, the chief psychiatrist, and it was unsettling. Patient number 247 has shown remarkable improvement in recent weeks. The auditory hallucinations have ceased, and she appears to be responding well to treatment. However, other patients continue to report unusual auditory phenomena throughout the facility. We have documented 17 separate incidents of phantom music in the past month alone. Of particular concern is the fact that these incidents seem to occur most frequently in areas where patient number 247 has spent time. Staff members have also begun reporting similar experiences, particularly during night shifts. I have recommended a full psychological evaluation of all personnel. Patient number 247 is scheduled for discharge tomorrow. I believe removing her from the environment will help resolve the ongoing issues with other patients and staff. The last page was a handwritten note, scrawled in what looked like desperate handwriting. She's not getting better. She's learning to control it. The music isn't in her head. It's coming from her. God help us all. We should never have let her. The note cut off mid-sentence. I flipped through the rest of the papers, looking for more information about what happened to Sarah, but there was nothing. Just medical charts for other patients, maintenance reports, and administrative memos about the hospital's closure. But one document caught my attention. It was a staff roster from the hospital's final week of operation. I scanned the list of names until I found what I was looking for. Rick Hartwell, night security supervisor. My boss had worked here. He'd been here when all this stuff was happening, which meant he knew exactly what I was walking into when he hired me. I was starting to put the pieces together, and I didn't like the picture they were forming. The music started again, closer this time. It was coming from right outside my door. But this wasn't the piano melody or the discordant singing I'd heard before. This was something new. A simple tune, like a lullaby, being hummed in a soft, sweet voice. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. I knew that voice. It was the same one I'd heard humming in the hallway earlier, but now I could make out the words. How I wonder what you are. The voice was right outside my door now. I could see a shadow moving back and forth in the gap underneath, like someone pacing in the hallway. Up above the world so high. The door handle started to turn. I'd locked it. I knew I'd locked it. But the handle was definitely moving, turning slowly to the right. Like a diamond in the sky. The desk I'd pushed against the door started to slide across the floor. Not fast, just a steady, inexorable movement, like someone was pushing it from the other side with superhuman strength. Twinkle, twinkle, little star. I grabbed my flashlight and looked around desperately for another exit. There was a window, but it was barred and faced a 6-story drop to the parking lot. No other doors, no vents big enough to crawl through. I was trapped. How I wonder what you are. The desk had moved about 3 feet now. The door was starting to crack open, and I could see fingers, 2 long, 2 pale fingers, curling around the edge. That's when I remembered something from the patient file. Sarah Chen had been scheduled for discharge the day before the hospital closed. But what if she'd never left? What if she'd been trapped here all these years, along with all the other patients who had died in this place? The door was halfway open now. In the gap, I could see part of a face. The same stretched, distorted features I'd seen on the nurse, but younger. A girl, maybe in her 20s, with long black hair and eyes that reflected my flashlight beam like mirrors. She was still humming the lullaby, but now she was looking right at me, and her smile was the most terrifying thing I'd ever seen. "Found you," she whispered. That's when I did the only thing I could think of. I started talking. "Sarah?" I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sarah Chen." The humming stopped. The door stopped moving. Those mirror eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my skin crawl. "You know my name," she said. Her voice was different now, more normal, almost curious. "I found your file," I said, holding up the medical charts. "I know what happened to you." She tilted her head to one side, like a bird studying an interesting insect. "What happened to me? You died here, didn't you? When the hospital closed. You never got to leave." For a moment, her expression was almost human. Sad, confused, like she was trying to remember something important. "I was supposed to go home," she said quietly. "They promised I could go home. But you can't leave, can you? None of you can. That's why the music never stops." Sarah's face began to change, becoming more distorted, more monstrous. "We're so lonely," she whispered. "So very, very lonely." The temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. My breath came out in visible puffs, and frost started forming on the windows. "But now you're here," Sarah continued, her voice becoming multiple voices, a chorus of the dead. "Now we don't have to be alone anymore." That's when I realized Rick hadn't hired me to guard the building. He'd hired me to feed it. So there I was, staring into the twisted face of a dead psychiatric patient while trying to figure out how to not become the hospital's newest permanent resident. And let me tell you, my college career counselor definitely hadn't prepared me for this scenario. "We've been waiting so long for someone new," Sarah said, and her voice was like wind chimes made of broken glass. "The others, they only stayed one night. But you're different." "Different how?" I asked, mainly to keep her talking while I tried to think of literally any plan that didn't end with me joining the ghost choir. "You're not running." She stepped fully into the room now, and I could see that her feet weren't quite touching the floor. "The others always ran straight for the exits. But you came deeper into our home." "Great." My brilliant survival instinct had apparently impressed a dead person. "Mom would be so proud." "Look, Sarah," I said, trying to sound calm and reasonable, like I was talking to a living person having a bad day, instead of a vengeful spirit. "I get that you're lonely, but I've got rent to pay and a cat that depends on me." That was a lie. I don't have a cat, but desperate times, you know? Sarah laughed, and it sounded like music boxes playing underwater. Rent. Oh, you silly boy. You won't need to worry about rent anymore. The temperature kept dropping. I could see my breath now, and the frost on the windows was getting thicker. Whatever Sarah was doing, it was turning the room into a freezer. Here's the thing, I said, backing toward the window even though I knew it was barred. My boss, Rick, is expecting me to finish my shift. If I disappear, he's going to come looking for me. Rick. Sarah's expression changed, becoming more focused. You mean Ricky? Little Ricky Hartwell. The way she said his name made my skin crawl. Like she was talking about an old friend she hadn't seen in years but was planning to visit real soon. He was so young when he worked here, Sarah continued, floating closer. So scared of us. He used to hide in the basement when we played our music, but he always came back. Night after night, year after year. We taught him so much. Taught him what? How to feed us. And that's when everything clicked into place. Rick hadn't just worked at the hospital. He'd been the night security guard back when it was still operational. He'd witnessed whatever had happened to Sarah and the other patients. And somehow he made a deal with them. Fresh people. New victims to keep the spirits entertained so they wouldn't venture outside the hospital walls. The rule, I whispered. Don't die. That's not advice. That's the job description. Sarah clapped her hands together, delighted. Oh, you are clever. Much cleverer than the last few. They barely lasted an hour before we caught them. What happens if I don't play along? Her smile faded, and for a moment she looked almost human again. Almost sad. Then we get very, very angry. And when we get angry, we don't stay in our home anymore. We go visiting. The threat was clear. Play their twisted game, or they'd leave the hospital and terrorize innocent people. Rick had found a way to contain them, but it required a steady supply of potential victims. People who wouldn't be missed. People like me. How long do I have to do this? I asked. Until morning, Sarah said, brightening up again. If you can hide from all of us until the sun rises, Ricky will come get you, and you can leave. Just like the others who got away. Others got away? Oh yes. Not many, but a few. Smart ones. Fast ones. Lucky ones. She paused, studying my face. The question is, which kind are you? Before I could answer, Sarah suddenly turned her head toward the door, like she was listening to something I couldn't hear. Oh, she said, sounding disappointed. The others want to play, too. I was hoping to have you all to myself, but sharing is caring, I suppose. From somewhere in the building, I could hear new sounds. Footsteps on the floors above and below. Doors slamming. Voices calling out in languages I didn't recognize. It sounded like the entire hospital was waking up. I should warn you, Sarah said, drifting toward the door. Some of my friends aren't as civilized as I am. They've been dead much longer, and they've forgotten how to be polite. Try not to let them catch you, won't you? I'd hate for our game to end too quickly. She vanished through the wall, leaving me alone in the rapidly cooling room. The sounds in the building were getting louder. Whatever other spirits call this place home, they were all coming out to play. And I was the entertainment. I grabbed my flashlight and a stack of medical files. Maybe there was something in them that could help me survive the next 3 hours, and headed for the door. I had two choices: stay put and wait for them to find me, or keep moving and hope I could outlast them until dawn. Given that Sarah had found me pretty easily in my hiding spot, staying put seemed like a losing strategy. The hallway was chaos. Doors were slamming open and shut by themselves. The temperature was fluctuating wildly, freezing cold in some spots, uncomfortably warm in others. And there were voices everywhere, speaking in whispers and shouts, some in English, some in languages I didn't recognize. I could see them now, moving through the walls and floors like they were made of water. Patients in hospital gowns, nurses in outdated uniforms, doctors in white coats. All of them searching, hunting, looking for the new toy they'd been promised. I made it to the stairwell before one of them spotted me. There. The voice came from behind me, high-pitched and excited. There he is. I turned to see a man in a doctor's coat floating about 6 inches off the ground. Half of his face was missing, like it had been eaten away by acid, and his remaining eye was fixed on me with predatory intensity. Fresh meat, he said, his voice echoing strangely. It's been so long since we had fresh meat. I bolted down the stairs, taking them 4 at a time. Behind me, I could hear more voices joining in, like a pack of wolves who'd caught a scent. The third floor was pandemonium. Spirits were emerging from every room, reaching for me with hands that weren't quite solid but felt real enough when they brushed against my skin. Each touch was like ice water, and I could feel my body temperature dropping with every contact. I dodged around a nurse who materialized directly in front of me, dove into the grasping arms of what looked like an orderly, and somehow made it to the next stairwell. But when I looked down, I could see more of them waiting on the floors below. They were hurting me, driving me towards some specific location where they wanted the game to end. But where? That's when I remembered something from Sarah's file. She claimed that the music came from patients who had died in the hospital. But what if it wasn't just random patients? What if there was a specific place where most of the deaths had occurred? I pulled out the medical files and frantically searched through them while spirits swirled around me like a supernatural tornado. There, a maintenance report from the hospital's final month. A note about ongoing issues with the electrical system in the basement level, specifically in the treatment wing. Treatment wing. In a 1960s psychiatric hospital, that could only mean one thing. Electroshock therapy. The basement. The place Rick had specifically told me not to go. The place where Sarah and probably dozens of other patients had died during treatment. That's where they were driving me. Back to the scene of their deaths, where their connection to this world was strongest. Where they could make me one of them permanently. But knowing their plan gave me an advantage. Instead of letting them herd me downstairs, I broke for the fourth floor, fighting my way through the crowd of spirits. They shrieked in frustration as I slipped past them, their icy touches leaving frost on my clothes. The fourth floor was quieter, but I knew it wouldn't stay that way long. I needed to find somewhere defensible, somewhere I could hold out until morning. But first, I needed to understand more about what I was dealing with. I found another office and barricaded myself inside, then continued reading through the files. There had to be something, some weakness or limitation that I could exploit. And there was. A report from Dr. Martinez, dated just 3 days before the hospital closed. The incidents appear to be tied to specific electromagnetic frequencies. Patients report that the phantom music stops completely when exposed to certain radio frequencies, particularly in the 40 to 60 megahertz range. We have had some success using modified radio equipment to disrupt the phenomena, but the effect is temporary. Radio frequencies. They could be disrupted by radio signals. I pulled out my phone. No signal for calls, but the FM radio app might still work. It didn't need a cell tower, just the phone's built-in antenna. My hands were shaking as I opened the app and started scanning through frequencies. Static, static, more static. There. A weak signal broadcasting what sounded like classical music. The temperature in the room immediately warmed up by about 10 degrees. The voices in the hallway got quieter, more distant. It was working, but my phone battery was at 23% and dropping. The radio app was a power hog, and I still had over 2 hours until sunrise. I needed to ration the disruption effect, use it only when absolutely necessary. The spirits were getting agitated. I could hear them in the walls, scratching and clawing, trying to find a way around whatever barrier the radio frequency was creating. Sarah's voice rose above the others, no longer sweet and childlike. "That's cheating," she screamed. "You can't use that. It's not fair. Life's not fair." I yelled back. "Deal with it." Probably not the smartest thing to say to a homicidal ghost, but I was running on adrenaline and spite at that point. The scratching sounds got more intense. Plaster started falling from the ceiling as something tried to claw its way through from above. I turned up the radio volume, and whatever was up there retreated with a shriek of frustration. But my battery was down to 19% now. I needed a better plan, something that didn't rely on slowly draining technology. And as I sat there in that cold, dark office, surrounded by the angry dead, I started to form an idea. It was risky. Actually, it was insane. But it might be my only shot at seeing another sunrise. I was going to have to go into the basement after all. So here's the thing about terrible plans. Sometimes they're the only plans you've got. My phone battery was down to 15%, the spirits were getting more aggressive by the minute, and I was about to voluntarily walk into what was basically their home base. But I figured out something important from those medical files. The basement wasn't just where they were strongest. It was also where the original electrical equipment was located. If radio frequencies could disrupt them temporarily, maybe I could find something down there with enough power to keep them at bay until morning. Old hospitals had massive electrical systems. Generators, transformers, maybe even some of that original radio equipment Dr. Martinez had mentioned. It was a long shot, but staying put wasn't an option. My makeshift barrier was already failing. Spirits were starting to seep through the walls despite the radio signal, and each one that got through made the others bolder. I took a deep breath, turned off the radio to conserve battery, and opened the door. The hallway erupted in chaos. Spirits swarmed toward me from every direction, their voices rising in a cacophony of hunger and rage. I clicked the radio back on just long enough to clear a path, then sprinted for the stairwell. Going down felt like descending into hell. The temperature dropped with each floor, and the spirits got more solid, more real. By the time I reached the ground level, they were substantial enough to actually grab at me, their icy fingers leaving welts on my skin. The basement door was heavy steel, painted institutional green and marked with warnings about authorized personnel only. I yanked it open and plunged into the darkness beyond. The stairs were concrete, steep, and narrow. My flashlight beam seemed weaker down here, like the darkness was actively fighting against it. The air smelled of mold and decay, and something else, something chemical and bitter that made my eyes water. At the bottom of the stairs, I found myself in a long corridor lined with pipes and electrical conduits. The ceiling was low, maybe 7 feet, and everything was covered in a thick layer of dust and grime. But I could hear something that gave me hope, the low hum of electrical equipment. Power was still running down here. I followed the sound deeper into the basement, past storage rooms filled with moldering furniture and medical equipment. The spirits were following me, but they seemed more cautious down here, like there was something about this place that made even them nervous. That's when I found it, the treatment wing. The hallway opened into a larger area with several rooms branching off from a central corridor. Most of the doors were open, revealing small chambers with metal tables and restraint systems. But it was the last room that made my blood run cold. The electroshock therapy room. The machine was still there, a massive contraption of metal and wires that looked like something from a mad scientist laboratory. But it wasn't just sitting there collecting dust. Someone had been maintaining it. The metal was clean, the wires were organized, and there was a logbook sitting open on a nearby table. I flipped through the pages with growing horror. Entries dating back 15 years, all in Rick's handwriting. Names, dates, and brief notes. Time each lasted 3 hours. Spirits seemed satisfied for 2 weeks. Maria Santos made it until 4 a.m. Good runner. Disruption lasted 10 days. Jake Morrison, clever kid, found a radio trick. Still got him in the end. Spirits quiet for almost a month. The entries went on and on. Dozens of people over the years, all fed to the spirits to keep them contained. And the most recent entry, dated just 2 days ago. Tyler Morrison, college dropout, no close family ties, perfect candidate. Spirits are getting restless again. Need fresh meat soon. That son of a bitch had been planning this from the moment I walked into his office. But as I read further, I found something interesting. The spirits weren't just randomly hungry. They followed patterns. They got more active during certain times of the year, particularly around the anniversary of the hospital's closure. And according to Rick's notes, that anniversary was tomorrow. Tonight wasn't just another feeding. This was the big event, the night when all the spirits would be at their strongest. Rick had brought me here specifically because he needed someone who could last long enough to satisfy them during their peak activity. But there was something else in the logbook. Technical notes about the electroshock machine and modifications Rick had made over the years. He turned it into some kind of spiritual amplifier, using the electrical current to strengthen the spirit's connection to the physical world, which meant if I could reverse the process. Clever boy. I spun around to find Sarah standing in the doorway. But she looked different now, more solid, more real. The electrical field from the machine was feeding her, making her stronger. You figured it out, she said, gliding into the room. Ricky's little secret. His deal with us. Let me guess, I said, backing toward the machine. He feeds you people, and you stay in a hospital instead of terrorizing the whole city. Oh, it's more than that. Sarah's form flickered, becoming even more solid. Every person who dies here makes us stronger. Every soul we claim adds to our power. Eventually, we'll be strong enough to leave this place permanently. To go anywhere we want, do anything we want. And Rick's helping you build an army of ghosts. Ricky understands the natural order. The living serve the dead. It's always been that way. More spirits were filing into the room now. The doctor with half a face, the nurse from upstairs, patients in hospital gowns, all of them becoming more solid as they drew power from the electrical field. My phone battery was down to 8%. The radio trick might work once more, but it wouldn't last long enough to matter. Time for Plan B. You know what, Sarah? I said, reaching for the controls on the electroshock machine. You're right about the natural order, but you got one thing wrong. What's that? I'm not here to serve anybody. I yanked every lever and turned every dial I could find, cranking the machine up to maximum power. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The spirits didn't get stronger. They started screaming. The electrical field that had been feeding them suddenly became painful, disruptive. Their forms began to flicker and fade as the modified frequency tore at their connection to the physical world. No, Sarah shrieked, her voice distorting as she began to dissolve. You don't understand. If we can't feed, if we can't stay strong, we'll fade away completely. Good. I shouted over the machine's growing hum. Maybe you should have thought of that before you started eating people. But as the spirits began to fade, something else happened. The electrical system started overloading. Sparks flew from the wall outlets, lights flickered throughout the building, and I could smell burning insulation. I was about to electrocute myself along with the ghosts. The machine was building towards some kind of catastrophic failure, but the spirits were almost gone. Sarah was barely visible now, her voice a whisper in the chaos. Please, she begged. We were just lonely. We just wanted company. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. These people had been patients, victims of a system that had failed them in life and trapped them in death. But then I remembered Rick's logbook. All those names, all those people who had died to feed their loneliness. Find better company, I said, and pushed the machine past its safety limits. The overload hit like a bomb going off. Every light in the building blazed bright enough to blind me, then died in a shower of sparks. The machine let out a mechanical scream and collapsed in on itself, its metal housing crumpling like tinfoil. Then silence. I was alone in complete darkness, surrounded by the smell of burned electronics and melted plastic. My flashlight was dead, probably fried by the electrical surge. But I was alive, and more importantly, I couldn't hear any spirits. I felt my way out of the treatment room and back toward the stairs, using the wall as a guide. The basement felt different now, empty in a way it hadn't before. Like a house after all the guests have gone home. It took me 20 minutes to make it back to the ground floor, and another 10 to find the lobby. But when I got there, I could see the first hints of dawn creeping through the windows. I'd made it. At exactly 6 a.m., I heard Rick's truck pull up outside. A few minutes later, the front door opened and he limped in, carrying his usual coffee and donuts. Rough night, he asked, looking me up and down. I was covered in dust and grime. My clothes were torn, and I probably looked like I'd been through a war zone. Your friends won't be bothering anyone anymore, I said. Rick's expression went through several changes: confusion, realization, and finally resignation. You destroyed the machine. Seemed like the right thing to do. He sat down heavily on a broken chair, suddenly looking every one of his 60-odd years. Do you have any idea what you've done? Those spirits, they weren't just trapped here. They were contained. Without the machine to anchor them, without regular feeding to keep them satisfied. They're gone, Rick. I watched them fade away. Some of them, maybe. The weak ones. But spirits that old, that powerful, they don't just disappear. He looked up at me with tired eyes. They scatter, spread out across the city, looking for new places to haunt, new people to torment. At least when they were here, I could control them. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. You're lying. You're trying to scare me. Am I? Rick pulled out his phone and showed me the screen. 17 missed calls, all from different numbers. Started about an hour ago. Reports of strange incidents all over the city. Unexplained sounds, cold spots, electronic malfunctions. They're out there, Tyler. And they're angry. He stood up slowly, wincing as his prosthetic leg took his weight. The job's still yours if you want it. Different responsibilities now, of course. Instead of keeping them contained, we'll be hunting them down, one by one. Trying to put the genie back in the bottle. And if I say no, Rick shrugged. Then you go home, and you hope they don't remember who destroyed their nice, comfortable prison. I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. When do I start? Rick smiled for the first time since I'd met him. "Welcome to the real job, kid. Hope you're a fast learner." As we walked out of Meridian Psychiatric Hospital for what I thought would be the last time, Rick handed me a new business card. This one had more than just a phone number. It had a title, Paranormal Containment Specialist. "One more thing," Rick said as we reached his truck. "The rule still applies. Don't die. Don't die." But now it's not just advice. He climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. Now it's a professional requirement. 3 months later, I'm still alive, still employed, and still learning exactly how deep this rabbit hole goes. Turns out, Meridian wasn't the only place Rick's company monitors. There are dozens of sites across the country, all with their own supernatural problems, all requiring people crazy enough to walk into haunted buildings and try to keep the monsters from escaping. The pay is incredible, the benefits are amazing, and the work is, well, it's never boring. My roommate Jake asked me the other day what I do for a living now. I told him I'm in security. He said I seem happier, more energetic, like I finally found my calling. If only he knew. The spirits from Meridian? We're still tracking them down. Most of them were too weak to survive long outside the hospital, but a few found new homes, new hunting grounds. And every few weeks, Rick gets a call about strange incidents that need investigating. That's where I come in. My phone's ringing right now, actually. Rick's name on the display, which means another job, another haunted location, another night of trying not to become a permanent resident of whatever nightmare we're walking into. But here's the weird part. I'm looking forward to it. Maybe I am crazy. Maybe getting hunted by ghosts for 6 hours broke something in my brain. Or maybe I just finally found something I'm good at. Either way, I've got work to do. The rule still applies, of course. Don't die. But after what I've seen, what I've survived, I'm starting to think that's easier said than done. Wish me luck. I'm going to need it.